What's up, humans? Welcome back to Mass Effect Revelation. And in this episode, we will be covering chapters 12 and 13. Ooh. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Chapter 12. Anderson and the Spectre sat in the kitchen, staring across the table at each other without speaking. The living room would have been more comfortable, but none of the chairs in there had survived the Krogan's rampage. Like all Turians, Saren's face was covered by a mask of hard cartilage, but Saren's mask was a pale color of bone. It looked like a skull. He reminded Anderson of the old Earth paintings depicting the Grim Reaper, the embodiment of death itself. Kaylee was in the back, tending to Grissom's wounds. The Admiral had tried to protest, but he was weak from loss of blood, and she managed to get him to lie down. She found a military field kit in his medicine chest, with enough Metagel to stabilize his condition, and now she was dressing his wound. She'd wanted to take him to a hospital, or at least call an ambulance, but the Spectre had adamantly refused. "After you answer my questions," was all he'd say. Anderson knew right then that he didn't like Saren. Anyone who would use the prolonged pain and suffering of a family member for leverage was a sadist and a bully. "He's resting now," Kaylee said, emerging from the back. "I gave him a sedative." She entered the kitchen and took a seat beside Anderson, instinctively aligning herself with one of her own kind. "Hurry up and ask your questions," she said tersely, "so I can get my father to a hospital." "Cooperate, and this will be over soon," Saren assured her, then added, "Tell me about the Sedone military base." "It was wiped out in a terrorist attack," Anderson answered, jumping in before Kaylee could say anything incriminating. The Turian glared at him. "Don't play me for a fool, human. That Krogan who nearly killed you all is a bounty hunter named Scar. I've been following him for the past 2 days." "What does that have to do with us?" Kaylee asked, her voice so innocent Anderson almost believed she really didn't know what was going on. "He was hired by a man who ordered the attack on Sedone," Saren replied with a scowl. "They sent him to eliminate the only survivor from the base. You." "Sounds like you know more about this than we do," Anderson countered. The Turian slammed his fist on the table. "Why was the base attacked? What were you working on there?" "Prototype technology," Kaylee offered before Anderson could speak. "Experimental weapons for the Alliance military." Saren tilted his head to the side, puzzled. "Experimental weapons technology? That's all?" Drama. What are you doing? What are you doing? We're recording. We're recording. We're recording. Can't go out there. Can't go out there. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I punched the chair. Saren tilted his head to the side, puzzled. "Experimental weapons technology? That's all?" "What do you mean, that's all?" Anderson sputtered, in disbelief, running with the lie Kaylee had so deftly handed him. "That hardly seems like a justification for attacking a heavily armed Alliance base," the Turian replied. "We're on the edge of a war on the verge," Anderson insisted. "Everybody knows it's got to be us or the Batarians. Why wouldn't they want to attack our primary weapons research base?" "No," Saren said flatly. "There's something more. You're hiding something. There was a long pause, and then the Turian casually brought out his pistol and set it on the table. Perhaps you don't understand the full extent of Spectre authority, he said ominously. I have a legal right to take any action I deem necessary during my investigations. You're going to kill us? Kaylee exclaimed, her voice raising in shock and disbelief. I have 2 rules I follow, Saren explained. The first is never kill someone without a reason. And the second? Anderson asked suspiciously. You can always find a reason to kill someone. Biotics, Kaylee blurted out. We were trying to find a way to turn humans into biotics. The Turian considered her explanation for a moment, then asked, What were the results? We were close, the young woman admitted, her voice getting softer. We found a handful of human subjects with latent biotic abilities, children, mostly. Far weaker than what we'd measured in other species, but with the amplification nodes and proper training, we still hope to see results. We just completed the implantation surgery on several of our most promising candidates a few weeks ago. None of them survived the raid. Do you know who ordered the attack? He asked, changing tact. Kaylee shook her head. Batarians, probably. I was on leave when it happened. Why are they coming after you now? Saren pressed. I don't know, she shouted and banged her fist on the table in exasperation. Maybe they think I can get the program up and running again. Maybe they destroyed the files, killed the test subjects, or all our research is gone. She dropped her head down onto her arms, crying against the table. And now, everybody's dead, she mumbled between sobs. All my friends, Dr. Keon, all of God, they're gone, Andromeda. Anderson placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, while the Turian just sat there watching impassively. After several seconds, he pushed himself away from the table and stood up. I will find out who ordered the attack, he told them as he put his gun back into his belt and turned to go. And why? At the door he paused and turned back to them. And if you're lying to me, I will find that out too. A moment later he was gone, disappearing into the night. Kaylee was still sobbing. Anderson pulled her close, trying to offer her comfort. She had done a good job with Saren, spinning lies with just enough strands of truth to make them hold together. But there was nothing false about her reaction now. The people of Sedone had been her friends, and they were all dead. She pressed her head up against him, seeking solace in the closeness of a fellow human being. A few minutes later, the tears stopped, and she gently pushed herself away from him. Sorry about that, she said, giving a nervous, rueful laugh and wiping her eyes. It's okay, Anderson replied. You've been through a lot. What's going to happen now? She asked. Are you going to arrest me? Not yet, he admitted. I meant what I said to your father the other day. I don't believe you're a traitor, but I need to tell you to tell me what's going on, and not the story you sold to that Turian. I want the truth. She nodded and sniffled. I guess it's the least I could do after you risked your life for us. But can we take my dad to the hospital first? Of course. It turned out getting Grissom to the hospital wasn't going to be easy. He was a big man, and the sedative Kaylee had given him had made him groggy. He was nothing but dead weight, uncooperative dead weight. It turned out getting Grissom to the hospital wasn't going to be easy. He was a big man, and the sedative Kaylee had given him had made him groggy. He was nothing but dead weight, uncooperative dead weight. Leave me alone, he grumbled as they struggled in vain to lug him out of bed and get him on his feet. Kaylee stood on one side of the bed holding his uninjured arm. Anderson was on the other, awkwardly gripping him around the waist and back to avoid touching his wounded bicep. Each time they tried to pull Grissom to a sitting position, he simply flopped back down. His daughter tried to reason with him, grunting each time they hoisted him up. "We have to get you to a hospital. Bleeding stopped," he protested, his words thick and slurred from his sedative. "Just let me sleep." "Let's try something else," Anderson said to Kaylee, standing up and coming around to her side. He sat down on the edge of the bed, facing away from the Admiral as he pulled the older man's good arm up across his back and over his shoulder. With Kaylee's help, he managed to stand, taking Grissom's not inconsiderable weight in a modified fireman's carry. "Put me down, you bastard," Grissom moaned. "You were stabbed in the arm and thrown against a wall by a pissed-off Krogan," Anderson said, taking an unsteady step toward the hall. "Someone needs to check you out." "You stupid son of a bitch," Grissom mumbled. "They'll figure out Kaylee's hiding here." Anderson hesitated, then staggered back a step and half sat, half fell onto the bed, letting Grissom slip back down onto it. "Is he too heavy?" Kaylee asked, concerned for both of them. "No," Anderson said, panting slightly from the exertion, "but he's right. We take him in, and you're finished." "What are you talking about?" "The ports are already on increased alert because of the attack on Sedona. We bring an Alliance legend like Admiral John Grissom into a hospital with these kinds of injuries, and security goes through the roof. There's no way in hell we'll be able to get you off the planet without being recognized." "I believe you're innocent, Kaylee, but nobody else does. They'll arrest you on sight." "So I'll just stay at the house," she said. "Nobody knows I'm here. Nobody even knows we're related." "Yeah, right. Nobody but me, the Spectre, that Krogan. We all figured it out, Kaylee. How long before somebody else makes the connection and comes snooping around? Before all this, nobody knew who you were. Nobody bothered with you. Now you're a suspect traitor. Your name and picture are on every news vid out there. Reporters will be digging into your past, trying to find out everything about you. Sooner or later, someone's going to figure out the truth. So what can we do?" It was Grissom who chimed in with the answer. "Get the hell off this planet," he muttered. "I know people who can sneak you past port security. Just need to call them in the morning." With that, Grissom rolled over and began snoring, finally giving in to the sedatives. Kaylee and Anderson left the room and headed into the kitchen. "Your father's a pretty smart man," Anderson said. Kaylee nodded, but all she said was, "You hungry? If we're stuck here until morning, we might as well have something to eat." They found some bread, cold cuts, and mustard in his fridge, along with 36 cans of beer. Tossing one over to Anderson, Kaylee said, "He's probably got something stronger hidden around here if you're interested." "Beer's fine," Anderson replied, cracking it open and taking a swig. It was a local brew, one he'd never tried before. It had a strong bite, bitter, but no aftertaste. Should go good with the sandwich. "Not much of a meal," she apologized once they were sitting at the table. "It's fine," he answered. "Tastes a little odd with the cold beer, though. Who keeps their bread in the fridge?" "My mother always did," she answered. "Guess that's the one thing my parents could agree on." "Too bad you need more than that to make a marriage work." They ate in silence after that, letting their minds wind down. When they were done, Anderson collected both plates and took them over to the counter. He grabbed them each another beer from the fridge and came back to the table. "Okay, Kaylee," he said, handing her the can. "I know it's been a long night, but now we have to talk. You up for this?" She nodded. "Take your time," he told her. "Just start at the beginning and work your way through. I need to know everything." We weren't working on biotics research at the base, she began softly, then smiled. But I guess you already know that. She has a pretty smile, Anderson thought. A good cover story for that Spectre, though, he said aloud. If he found out what was really going on, he trailed off, remembering Ambassador Goyle's warnings about the Spectres. Saren had saved their lives. He wondered if he really could have brought himself to murder the Turian if it had been necessary to keep humanity secret. And even if he tried, could he have succeeded? Let's just say that was quick thinking on your part, he finally told her. Kaylee took the compliment in stride and continued with the story, her voice slowly growing in strength and confidence as she spoke. Sedone was dedicated to one very specific task, the development and study of artificial intelligence. We knew it was risky, but we had rigid safety protocols to make sure nothing could go wrong. I started as a low-level systems analyst at the base 2 years ago, working directly under Dr. Kian, the man in charge of the project. People use the term genius all the time, she said, making no attempt to hide her admiration, but he really was one. His mind, his research, the way he thinks, it's on a level so far above the rest of us, we can barely even grasp it. Like most of the people there, I just did whatever Dr. Kian told me to. Half the time I didn't even fully understand why I was doing it. Why weren't you at Sedone when it was attacked? Anderson asked, gently nudging her toward the relevant part of her tale. A few months ago, I noticed some changes in Dr. Kian's behavior. He was spending more and more time in the lab. He started working double shifts. He hardly slept, but he seemed to have his endless supply of desperate, frantic energy. Was he manic? I don't think so. I never saw any sign of it before, but suddenly we were integrating all sorts of new hardware into the system. Our research started going into totally different directions. We completely abandoned conventional practices and went with radical new theories. We were using prototype technology and designs unlike anything we'd ever seen before. At first, I just thought Dr. Kian had made some kind of breakthrough, something that got him all fired up. In the beginning, it was exhilarating. His excitement was infectious, but after a while, I started to get suspicious. Suspicious? It's hard to explain. Something about Dr. Kian was different, altered. I worked with him for almost 2 years. This wasn't like him. There was definitely something wrong. He wasn't just working harder, he was obsessed, like he was being driven by some. And it felt like he was hiding something. Some secret he didn't want anyone else on the project to know about. Before, if he needed something from you, he'd go into excruciating detail about why your work was important. He'd tell you how it interconnected with every other department on the project. Even though I think he knew nobody else could really grasp the full complexity of what we were working on. The past few months were different. He stopped communicating with the team. He'd give orders but no explanations. It just wasn't like him. So I started digging into the databanks. I even hacked into Dr. Kian's restricted files to see what I could find out. You what? Anderson was shocked. I can't believe you. How is that even possible? Encryption and security algorithms are my specialty, she said with just a hint of pride. Then her voice became defensive. Look, I know it was illegal. I know I broke the chain of command, but you weren't there. You can't understand how strange Dr. Kian was acting. What did you find out? He hadn't just taken the project in a radical new direction. Our research was completely off the grid. All the new theories, the new hardware, it was all based on preparing our neural networks to link into some kind of alien artifact. So what? Anderson said with a shrug. Pretty much every major advance we've made in the last 2 decades was based on protein artifacts. And it's not just us. Galactic society wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for compatible alien technology. Every species in Citadel space would still be stuck inside their own solar systems. This is different, she insisted. Take the mass relays. We only have a limited understanding of how they work. We know how to use them, but we don't understand enough to try and actually build one. At Sedone, we were trying to create an artificial intelligence, possibly the most devastating weapon we could unleash on a galaxy, and Dr. Kian wanted to introduce an element to the research that was beyond his comprehension. Anderson nodded, recalling the infamous Manhattan Project of the early 20th century from his history courses at the Academy. Desperate to create an atomic weapon, scientists on the project unwittingly exposed themselves to dangerous levels of radiation as a matter of course in their experiments. 2 researchers actually died on the project, and many others were stricken with cancer or long-term consequences from prolonged radiation poisoning. We weren't supposed to repeat the mistakes of the past, she said, making no effort to hide the disappointment in her voice. I thought Dr. Keown was smarter than that. You were going to report him, weren't you? The young woman nodded slowly. You were doing the right thing, Kaylee, he said, noticing the uncertainty in her expression. It's hard to believe that when all my friends are dead. Anderson could see she was suffering from a classic case of survivor guilt, but even though he felt sorry for her, he still needed more information. Kaylee, we still have to figure out who did this and why. Maybe somebody wanted to stop Dr. Keown, she offered in a whisper. Maybe my investigation tipped someone else off, someone higher up, and they decided to shut the project down for good. You think someone in the Alliance did this? Anderson was horrified. I don't know what to think, she shouted. All I know is I'm tired and scared and I just want this all to be over. For a second he thought she was going to start crying again, but she didn't. Instead she stared right at him. So are you still going to help me figure out who's behind this, even if it turns out the Alliance is somehow involved? I'm on your side, Anderson promised. I don't believe anyone in the Alliance was behind this, but if it turns out they were, I'll do my best to take them down. I believe you, she said after a moment. So what now? She'd come clean with him, now he had to do the same. Alliance Command told me they think whoever attacked the base was after Dr. Keown. They think he might still be alive. But the vids are saying there were no survivors. There's no way to be sure. Most of the bodies were vaporized at the scene. So why now? Kaylee asked. The project's been running for years. Maybe they just found out. Maybe Keown's new research tipped them off. Maybe there's some connection to that alien artifact he discovered. Or maybe I forced them to make a move. Anderson wasn't about to let her go down that road. This isn't your fault, he told her, leaning in and grabbing her hand tightly. You didn't order the attack on Sedone. You didn't help anyone bypass base security. He took a breath and spoke his next words slowly and empathetically. Kaylee, you are not responsible for this. He released her hand and sat back. And I need you to help me figure out who was. We need to find out if anybody else knew about this Prothean artifact. It wasn't Prothean, she corrected. At least, not according to Dr. Keown's notes. So, what was it? Asari? Turian? Batarian? No, nothing like that. Keown didn't know what it was exactly, but it was odd. He thought it might even predate the Protheans. Predate the Protheans, Anderson repeated, trying to make sure he'd heard her properly. That's what Keown thought, she said with a shrug. Where did he find it? Where is it now? I don't think it was ever at the base. Dr. Keown wouldn't have brought it in until it was ready to integrate into our project. And he could have found it anywhere, she admitted. Every few months he'd leave the base for a week or two. I always assumed he was giving some kind of status report to his superiors at Alliance Command, but who knows where he went or what he was up to. Somebody outside the base had to know about this, Anderson pressed. You said Dr. Keon changed, took the research in a whole other direction. Was there anyone not on the project who might have noticed something out of the ordinary? I can't think of... Wait! The hardware from our new research. It all came from the same supplier on Kamala. Kamala? Your supplier was Batarian? We never dealt with them directly, she explained, speaking quickly. Suspicious hardware purchases anywhere in Citadel space are red flagged and reported to the Citadel. Throughout the existence of the project, we used hundreds of shell companies to place individual orders for each component. Orders too small to attract attention on their own. Then we configured them at the base and integrated them into our existing hardware infrastructure. Dr. Keon wanted to avoid compatibility issues in the neural networks, so he made sure almost everything could be traced back to a single supplier, Datan Manufacturing. It made sense in a convoluted way, Anderson realized. Given the current political tension between Batarians and humans, nobody would suspect that the primary supplier of a classified Alliance research project would be on Kamala. If somebody at the supplier noticed a pattern in the purchases, Kaylee continued, they might have figured out what we were up to. As soon as Grissom gets us off this world, Anderson declared, we're gonna pay the Tan facility a little visit. Chapter 13. Saren made his way through the darkness of Elysium's moonless night toward his waiting vehicle. He knew the humans back at the house were hiding something from him. There was more going on at Sedone than they had admitted. A Spectre had the legal right to forcibly extract information from anyone, even Alliance soldiers. But having that right and actually being able to use it were two different things. Elysium was an Alliance world. He had no idea if one of Grissom's neighbors had called the authorities after the gunfight with Scar. It wasn't likely. The house was well isolated from its neighbors, but Saren couldn't take that chance. If the local Alliance authorities arrived to find a Turian brutally interrogating their fellow soldiers, his Spectre status wouldn't help him. Besides, they weren't the ones he was after. The humans were insignificant to his real investigation. They probably knew something about why Scar had been sent after them, but he doubted they had any real idea who had sent him. The Krogan was the key. Saren had no trouble following him to Elysium. He'd just have to pick up his trail again. The Verge was the untamed frontier of Citadel space, but even out here, it was nearly impossible to travel between worlds without drawing attention. Smaller ships were physically capable of landing almost anywhere on a habitable planet, but any destination world occupied by an established colony would instantly pick up any incoming vessels that didn't touch down at the spaceport. They'd have military personnel on the scene ready and waiting to arrest everyone on board, if they didn't simply blast the offending ship from the sky. That meant Scar would have to use the spaceports, and even if he found some way to sneak past border security, he wasn't hard to pick out of a crowd. As a Spectre, Saren had eyes and ears on virtually every world scattered across the Verge. Wherever the bounty hunter turned up next, one of his contacts would let him know. He could issue an order to have Scar arrested, but he doubted the Krogan would let himself be taken alive. Having him die in a gun battle with local authorities wouldn't get Saren any closer to whoever was behind the attack on Sedone. No, the better thing to do was to simply find him and follow him, as he'd done on Elysium. Eventually the Krogan would lead him right to his employer. Edan Haddah was once again spending the night inside the loathsome warehouse outside Hatra. Once again, he was sitting in the uncomfortable chair waiting for Scar to arrive, and once again, he was accompanied by his personal guard, the same Blue Suns mercs who had been there for the first meeting with the Krogan. The ones who'd survived, anyway. But this time, Adon knew he had the upper hand. Kaylee Sanders was not dead. He'd paid the bounty hunter good money to do a job, and Scar had failed. This time, Adon swore he would be the one to dictate the terms of their meeting. The warehouse was full of large shipping crates and cargo containers. A small area had been cleared out in the back for Adon to conduct his business. From this position, it was normally difficult to hear when someone arrived at the front door, but there was no mistaking the loud pounding when the Krogan showed up. "Make sure you take his weapons," Adon called out as a pair of Batarian mercs went to fetch the new arrival. "All of them," their employer added, vividly remembering the knife Scar had snuck in last time. From the front came the sounds of a loud argument. Though he couldn't quite hear the words, he could clearly make out the bass tones of the Krogan's deep rumble. A minute later, one of the Batarians came back alone. "The Krogan won't hand over his weapons," he said. "What?" Adon asked, surprised. "He won't hand over his weapons, and he's wearing full armor." "I won't meet with him if he's armed," Adon vowed. "That's what I told him," the merc responded, tilting his head to the left in a gesture of suspicion. "He just laughed, said he was happy to walk away and consider your business arrangement over." Adon cursed under his breath. The Krogan had been paid in full up front. Normally, a Batarian would never agree to such terms, but exceptions had to be made for a man of Scar's reputation. "Let him keep his weapons," he finally relented. "Escort him back here." "Is that wise?" "Tell your men they are free to kill him this time if he tries anything. Make sure the bounty hunter hears you." The merc smiled, anticipating a chance for revenge, and headed back to the front. When he returned, the bounty hunter was with him, and he looked angry. Adon had never actually seen a Krogan battle master in full armor before. It was a terrifying sight, like a living tank rolling toward him. It was all he could do not to take a step back. Scar's weapons weren't drawn, but a full arsenal was slotted into his armor. A pistol on either hip, a collapsible heavy-fire assault rifle, and a high-powered shotgun were slung across his back. His armor had several small holes in the chest, each one ringed with discolored blood. Dark stains ran down from the wounds, tainting the armor and severing his as mute testimony to the battle he had fought on Elysium. The Blue Suns watched him closely, 9 assault rifles tracking him at every step of the way. The Krogan didn't seem to care. He only had eyes for the man who'd hired him. He bore down on him with long, heavy strides, the relentless clomp, clomp, clomp of his boots, the only sound in the warehouse. For a brief second, Adon thought he wouldn't stop. He'd just keep walking, churning the Batarian's smaller frame beneath his feet, grinding him into a pulp. Instead, he pulled up less than a meter away, his breath coming in angry, rasping grunts. "You failed," Adon said. He'd meant to come out as a stingy accusation, but standing in the shadow of the massive killer before him took all the bravado from his voice. "You didn't tell me I'd have to deal with a specter," Scar snarled back. "A specter?" Adon said with surprise. "Are you certain?" "I know a specter when I see one," Scar roared. "Especially this one, Turian bastard." The corners of Adon's mouth turned down in an expression of displeasure, but he didn't say anything. This was bad. He knew Scar was talking about Saren. The Turian was easily the most infamous specter in the Verge. He was known for three things: his ruthlessness, his loyalty to the council, and his ability to get results. I make it a habit never to get involved in Spectre business, Scar said, his voice dropping to a low growl. You knew that when you hired me. You tricked me, Batarian. My guards will fire on you if you try anything, Adan said quickly, sensing the implied threat. You might kill me, but you'll never get out of here alive. The Krogan's big head rolled from side to side, glancing at the armed mercs and evaluating his chances. Realizing this was a battle even he couldn't win, he slowly took a step back from Adan. I guess we're in this together then, he snorted. But you're going to have to double my fee. Adan blinked in surprise. This was not how he expected the negotiations to go. You're not bargaining from a position of power, he pointed out. You didn't complete the job. If anything, I should ask for a refund, or I could just have my men eliminate you now. Scar barked out a loud laugh. Ha ha! You're right. Sanders is still alive. She's probably talking to Saren right now, telling him everything she knows. How long until he figures out you were behind all this? How long until he shows up on Kamala? The Batarian didn't answer. Sooner or later, that Spectre will track you down, the bounty hunter warned, pressing his point. When he does, your only hope of staying alive is to have me on your side. Adan brought his hands together, forming a 5-fingered steeple as he considered the situation. The Krogan was correct. He needed his help now more than ever, but he wasn't willing to admit total defeat. Very well, he conceded. I'll double your pay, but in exchange, you'll have to do something for me. Scar didn't say anything, but merely waited for the Batarian to continue. I was never at Sidon, Adan explained. Sanders has no knowledge of my identity. With the files at the base destroyed, there's only one connection left linking me to this crime. Dr. Kion's supplier here on Kamala. Dartan Manufacturing, Scar said after only a moment's hesitation, quickly putting the pieces together. Once again, Adan was impressed at how quickly his mind worked. Does Sanders know about the supplier? I can't be sure, Adan admitted, but if she mentions it, that's the first place the Spectre will go. I'm not willing to take that risk. So what do you need from me? I ordered you to come back to this world so you could wipe out Dartan Manufacturing. Eliminate all the personnel, all the records, burn it to the ground, leave nothing behind. Nothing! You brought me back for that? Scar spat out. Are you stupid? Saren's gonna have his people watching for me. He's probably already on his way here to try and track me down. We attack Titan, and he'll be there inside an hour. You'd practically lead him straight to your supplier. He might learn about Titan from Sanders anyway, Adan countered. He refused to back down this time. He was tired of losing face to this brute. You can get in, finish the job, and disappear before Seven ever arrives, he insisted. By the time he gets to Titan, all the evidence will be destroyed, and you can be long gone. There won't be anything left for him to find. You'll just have to work fast. That's how mistakes get made, the bounty hunter argued. I don't like sloppy missions. Tell your men to go in without me. This is not open to negotiation, Adan shouted, finally losing his temper. I hired you to kill someone. You failed. I demand something for the money I'm paying you. Scar shook his head in disbelief. You know it was a mistake bringing me back here for this. I thought you were smart enough not to put your pride ahead of your business. You thought wrong, Adan replied, no longer shouting, but his voice was cold as ice. It was more than simple pride. Batarian culture placed tremendous value on social caste. He was a man of high standing. If he simply forgave the Krogan for this failure, it would be an admission that they were equals, something he was not about to do. The Krogan took another long look at the blue suns stationed around the warehouse, their guns still raised and ready, and pointing right at him. Datan has heavy security, he finally said. How are we even supposed to get inside? I have some of their people on my payroll, Adan replied with just a hint of smugness. He'd finally managed to back Scar into a corner. They were bargaining on his terms now. They were good enough to take out the Alliance soldiers at Sidon. They screwed that mission up, Scar objected. That's why I'm sending you along this time, was Adan's smug reply. Anderson flashed his military ID and slipped his thumb into the portable scanner held by the Alliance guard working the Port Authority entrance. The young man, who jumped to stand at attention as they'd approach, glanced down at the computer screen to confirm the readout. Sir, the guard replied with a curt nod, handing it back to him a moment later. The lieutenant did his best not to hold his breath as Kaylee placed her own thumb into the scanner and handed over her phony ID and the optical storage disk with the counterfeit authorization orders they'd purchased earlier that day. The man who'd forged them had come to the house first thing in the morning, arriving less than 10 minutes after Grissom's phone call. He was young, no older than 20 by Anderson's guess. He was dressed in shabby, wrinkled civvies, and he had long, greasy black hair. His face was covered with a dark growth he was trying to pass off as a beard, and it looked like he hadn't showered in a week. The Admiral didn't say who the man was or how he knew him. He's a professional, he told Anderson. He works fast, and he won't rat you out. When he first arrived, the kid had looked in surprise at the broken windows, the smashed furniture, and the burned hole in the lawn, where the shotgun blast had narrowly missed, decapitating the Krogan. But he hadn't asked any questions, not about that anyway. What do you need? Was all he said, once he was inside, setting a nondescript case he had with him on the kitchen table. Something to get them into the restricted loading bays at the spaceport, Grissom had replied, plus a disguise and a new ID for Kaylee. They need to leave today. I got to charge extra for a rush job, he warned. Grissom just nodded. I'll afford it, like always. The young man opened the case to reveal an array of unusual tools, gadgets, and exotic equipment Anderson couldn't even begin to guess the function of. Using a variety of these, it took him half an hour to produce an OSD with the appropriate authorizations. It took another 20 minutes to encode a new name and rank on Kaylee's Alliance ID, Corporal Susan Weathers. That's not going to work, Anderson warned. They won't have any records of Corporal Weathers in their systems. They will 20 minutes after I leave here, Kid assured with a cocky grin. I'll add Corporal Weathers to the system, then I'll mirror all Kaylee's data and block system access to her file. When they scan her thumbprint, it'll be Weathers who shows up on their screens, not Sanders. You have access to Alliance data files? Anderson asked in disbelief. Only the ones at the ports. Don't try to use this ID once you're off Elysium. I didn't think it was possible to infiltrate the Alliance systems, Anderson said, fishing for information. You sure I can trust this guy? Kid asked Grissom. Funny, Anderson thought. I was wondering the same thing about you. For today, Grissom replied. Next time you see him, you might want to turn around and walk in the other direction, though. The Alliance has solid security, the young man admitted, speaking with a casual nonchalance as he worked. Getting in is tough, but it's not impossible. What about the purges? Kaylee asked. Anderson looked at her quizzically, and she explained for this benefit. Every 10 hours, the Alliance runs a full security sweep on their systems to track down and quarantine any new data coming into the system. It lets them identify fraudulent data and trace it back to the source. I plan a little self-regressive algorithm in the data before I upload it, the kid explained, bragging more than just a little. Something I came up with myself. By the time they run the security sweep, your data will be back online and all traces of Corporal Weathers or these phony authorizations will be long gone. They can't trace something that isn't there. Kaylee nodded in appreciation, and the man gave her a wink and a leering smile that made Anderson's fist involuntarily clench. It wasn't jealousy. Not exactly. Kaylee was his responsibility now. It was only natural he'd instinctively want to protect her, but he had to be careful not to overreact. Unfortunately, nobody had noticed. They were all focused on the young man and his work. They might have a physical description of you too, he warned Kaylee. We better change your appearance just in case. He digitally altered the existing photo on Kaylee's ID, darkening and shortening her hair, changing the color of her eyes, and deepening the pigments of her skin. Then he had her pop a handful of pigment pills. Next he used shaded contact lenses, hair dye, and a pair of scissors to make Kaylee's physical appearance match her digital image. He seemed to enjoy it a little too much for Anderson's comfort, working the dye into her hair for several minutes and lingering a little too long over her locks before he cut them. By the time he was finished with her hair, Kaylee's skin had become almost as dark as Anderson's. The kid stood directly in front of Kaylee and held the ID up beside her face, comparing the image to the real thing. Not bad, he appreciatively thought. It wasn't clear if he was talking about his work or Kaylee herself. Your skin will start to lighten up again by tomorrow, he told her, standing up and holding out the reinvented Alliance ID card. So be careful, you won't match the pic anymore. Shouldn't matter, she said with a shrug. Corporal Weathers won't even exist in the system by then anyway, right? He didn't answer, but gave her another sly wink and let his fingers rub suggestively against hers as she took the ID from him. Anderson had to restrain himself from punching the slime ball right in the face. She's not your wife, he thought to himself. Helping her won't make up for 8 years of ignoring Cynthia. When all was said and done, however, the lieutenant had to admit the kid's forgery was good. He had special training to recognize fraudulent documents, and even though he knew they were fakes, he couldn't tell them from the real thing. This was the true test, however, running her thumbprint through the scanners at the Port Authority. Here you go, Corporal Weathers, the guard said, handing the altered documentation back to Kaylee after glancing briefly at his screen to confirm her identity. You need to head to Bay 32, way down at the far end. Thank you, Kaylee said with a smile. The guard nodded, snapped a crisp salute off to Anderson, then sat down and went back to the paperwork on his desk as they turned and walked away. Take a look to see if he's still watching us, Anderson whispered, once they were out of earshot. They were still heading in the direction of Bay 32, but of course that wasn't their real destination. Kaylee glanced back coyly, peeking over her shoulder. If the guard was watching them, he'd hopefully just think the young corporal found him attractive enough to sneak a second look. But he was completely focused on the screen at his desk, the model of efficiency as he rapidly typed away at the keyboard. All clear, Kaylee answered. This is it, Anderson said, turning sharply into an entrance of Bay 17 and pulling her with him. There was an old cargo freighter in the bay, a loading sled, and a number of heavy shipping crates. At first glance, there didn't seem to be anybody in the bay, and then a short, heavy-set man stepped out from the other side of the ship. "Any problems with the guard?" he asked. Kaylee shook her head. "Do you know why we're here?" Anderson asked, not even bothering to ask the man's name, which he knew would never be given. "Grissom filled me in." "How do you know my father?" Kaylee asked, curious. He regarded her coldly for a second and said, "If he wanted you to know, he probably would have told you himself." Turning away, he added, "We're scheduled to lift off in a couple hours. Follow me." Most of the space inside the ship's hold was filled with cargo. There was barely enough room for the two of them to sit down, but they did the best they could. As soon as they were settled, the man sealed the door, and they were plunged into complete darkness. Kaylee was sitting right across from him, but with no light it was impossible for Anderson to even make out her silhouette. He could, however, feel the outside of her leg pressing up against his. There simply wasn't room for either of them to pull away. The closeness was unsettling. He hadn't been with a woman since he and Cynthia had separated. "I'm not looking forward to the next 6 hours," he said, looking to distract his inappropriate thoughts with conversation. Even though he spoke softly, his words seemed unnaturally loud in the blackness. "I'm more worried about what we'll do once we reach Kamala," Kaylee answered, a disembodied voice in the gloom. "Datan's not just going to hand over their files to us." "I'm still working on that," Anderson admitted. "I'm hoping I'll come up with a plan on the trip." "We should have plenty of time to think," Anderson answered. Anderson answered, "No." "We should have plenty of time to think," Kaylee answered. "There's not even enough room here to lay down and get some sleep." After a few minutes, she spoke again, changing topics without warning. "Before my mother died, I promised her I'd never speak to my father again." Anderson was momentarily caught off guard by the personal confession, but he recovered quickly. "I think she'd understand." "It must have been a shock for you," she continued, "seeing the most famous Alliance soldier in a state like that." "I'm a little surprised," he admitted. "When I was in the academy, your father was always portrayed as the embodiment of everything the Alliance stood for. Courage, determination, self-sacrifice, honor. Seems a little strange that he now knows the kind of people who can sneak us off this world like this." "Are you disappointed?" she asked, "knowing the great John Grissom associates with forgers and smugglers?" "Considering our situation, I'd be a hypocrite if I said yes," he joked. Kaylee didn't laugh. "When you hear about someone for so long, you assume you know something about them," he said in a more somber tone. "It's easy to confuse the reputation with the real person. It's only when you meet them that you realize you never really knew anything at all." "Yeah," Kaylee said thoughtfully. Then they were silent for a long, long time. Ooh. Action. The action. It's getting there. We're ramping up. Thank you guys so much for joining me for chapters 12 and 13. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We're gonna continue doing all this. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the other videos on the channel. Above me, I got a new playlist called Lore Dump, where I'm going to have other playlists. So, for Mass Effect Revelation, I have Revelation over there in the corner. But in this playlist, I am going to be dropping in there the codex entries from those episodes and also the reading, because that's where it's all going to be. That's all the lore that exists. It's all right there. So that's going to be this playlist. I'm going to test it out. And then, yeah, don't forget to like the video if you liked it. Leave comments down below of what's going on with you, and if there's some books that you'd like me to read coming up after we're done with all of this. I would be interested to know your thoughts, and yeah, I'll check you out down in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next few chapters. Peace.